Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In this session, we shall discuss a very important misconception which is generally found regarding Islam and women. And this misconception actually emanates from the fact that it is understood that Islam allows men to keep slave women and of course as a result of that have sex with them. Now, first of all, we must study this issue in the proper perspective in which it is mentioned in the Quran. In the times of the Prophet, he had inherited a society in which scores and scores of slaves used to live in various homes. And of course, men would have slave ladies, slave women, and they would have sexual relationships with them. Now, Islam wanted to do away with this institution. However, it was very deeply rooted in the Arab society, and Islam adopted a very gradual way to uproot this institution and to actually finish it from the society of Arabia. However, as I said, since this institution was very, very deeply rooted in the society, if an immediate directive had been given, then of course slave women and slave men would have been left at the mercy of the society, and of course slave ladies would have nothing to do except to turn to prostitution to earn for their living. So therefore, very wisely, Islam adopted a very gradual strategy in eliminating this institution. However, of course, while this strategy was being adopted, slavery was given a sanctity, of course, and these relationships with slave ladies were allowed. However, after a certain point of time, Muslims were ordered that they must, if their slaves asked them for mukatibat or for a contract through which they had to be released, then Muslims were bound that they should do so. And in this regard, I'd like to enumerate the whole campaign actually which the Quran undertook and which we find recorded in history also, in order to eradicate this inhuman institution of slavery. We know that first of all, in the very early Meccan surahs, the Quran had made a very profound appeal to Muslims by the words "Fakku Raqaba," release the necks, which actually incites and it actually urges Muslims to liberate the slaves which they have. Secondly, Muslims were told that unless they do so, unless they liberate their slaves, they must feed them, they must clothe them in the same manner as they feed and clothe themselves, so that the standard of these slaves is raised. Thirdly, in many crimes, in many sins like zihar and unintentional murder, liberating a slave was actually part of the atonement of that sin. So this again gave a big impetus to the emancipation of slavery in Arabia. Now, fourthly, it was also told in the Quran, the Arab society of those times, they were told that slave men and slave women who were able to marry, they should be married off, so that socially and economically their status could be raised and they could live as people as married people in the society. And in this regard, a fourth step which was taken was that people were told that if they had no option to marry among free women, so they could marry slave women, provided that they were kept chaste, and they were Muslims, of course. And of course, in this regard, they were bound, they were obligated to give dower in this regard, so that the status of the slave ladies could be raised to the status of a free lady. In this regard, the sixth directive which was given was that in cases of zakat, one big head was fixed for firriqab, which is called releasing of the necks, and in which money could be given for liberating slaves, and this of course gave a great impetus to the campaign of slave emancipation in Arabia. The seventh directive which was given in this regard was that fornication or adultery was regarded as prohibited by Islam. We knew that in those times prostitution was rampant in the Arab society, and the basic ingredients of these prostitution centers were slave ladies. So by prohibiting fornication and adultery, Islam actually closed the doors of slave women being used for this purpose. The eighth directive which was given in this regard was that people were told that they should not call slave ladies and slave men by the name which was generally used for them, which was abd and amma. And in their place, normal words which were fata and fatat, boy or girl, or man or woman, they were urged to adopt these words so that the whole atmosphere about these slaves should change. The ninth directive which was given in this regard was that in cases of prisoners of war, it was ordained, it was directed that people must always release these prisoners of war. And we know that a great source of slavery were these prisoners of war. So the Muslims were told in Surah Muhammad that they must either release these slaves for ransom, or without ransom, but they must not keep them in their custody. This, of course, closed the doors of slavery to a great extent. And the 10th and final directive, which actually was the final nail in the coffin, was that Muslims were told that they must release their slaves if the slaves could offer some monetary guarantee for the fact that they would become earning individuals of the society, and also could perform some errand so that they could prove that they would not burden the society with themselves. And this, in technical terms, is actually called Mukatabat. And this directive of Mukatabat actually was the final nail in the coffin, as I said, to give a great boost to the emancipation of slaves in Arabia. These then are the 10 directives or 10 measures which we find in history and in the Quran, recorded in the Quran, which show that Islam gradually adopted a great campaign to liberate slaves from the Arab society. And if it had inherited this inhuman institution, it had no choice but to adopt this gradual procedure, simply because it was very deeply rooted in the Arab society. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.